do I do with it? Well, you're an excellent candidate for the job as a conclusion. Okay. Strong conclusions. Priya mentioned earlier what makes a strong conclusion. We talked about support, evidence. I like the term premises. And I like the term logic. When I was in undergrad, I sat in on a philosophy class for one day. That was my entire philosophy training. And what I took away from that class is that a strong conclusion is supported by accurate premises that logically lead to that conclusion. So you're going to lay out the evidence, and you're going to convince your audience that it leads to that conclusion. And your audience looking at that is going to say, yes, it is logical, it makes sense. This is not something you ever want your audience to be able to question you on. And this is how you want to construct your presentations. Construct those building blocks of your conclusion. Make sure they're supported and they're logical. So I've got a premise definition, I've got a logical argument definition here. Let's discuss that in example. So let me throw out some premise examples. The data shows an upward trend of 4%. Is that a premise? Yeah, that's where I'm going with this. That's a premise. That's something we can use for a conclusion. How about this? I have 6 years of accounting experience and I completed my CPA. It's a premise. It's going to lead somewhere. It's going to say, I'm a good candidate for the job. Logical conclusion examples. This is what I mean by logic. Suppose I were to tell you this. The candidate has great quantitative skills, so I recommend that we offer her the job. Do you like that as a logical conclusion? Yes. All right. Well, I have a question for you. How do you know that quantitative skills are important for this job? Suppose this is a moving company. You need someone who's strong and can move couches. Now do you want to hire her? So we need a stronger argument. Suppose you were to say this. Quantitative skills are the best way to assess candidates for this role, and candidate X has the best quantitative skills. So I recommend we offer her the job. Simple building blocks. Just think of these simple building blocks as you construct your presentation. It's going to help you when you get up in front of your audience, decrease your anxiety, keep you on the important things as you work your way through it. So, as we develop this content, as you think of your presentation for next week, you might think about what you want to accomplish. What do you want to stand up here and give to your fellow MBA students? You want to teach them, show them, persuade them of. And you're going to do that, premises and conclusions. Just going through this process in your head is going to help you think about what are the important things you should be talking about. Because if you find in your content that you have something there that is not a premise, that leads to an important conclusion, then maybe you should think about taking that out of your presentation. Do you agree with me on that? Just want stuff that's important to our audience, important to the conclusion, the point we're trying to make. Think about what we should take out, what we should accent, how we should organize our content. All those decisions become clear when we think about what we're trying to accomplish and the conclusions we're using to accomplish it with. Help us understand what we want to emphasize, what we want to de-emphasize, how we want to organize. Gaining confidence and brevity. This is an important one. Does anyone ramble when they give a presentation? You find yourself doing that? I do sometimes. But if you thought through ahead of time, what's my conclusion? What are the important premises that support it? When I've made those points, I can stop talking. I'll do that with a lot of clients that have a tendency to just go on and on. Let's, in a calm environment, let's think about the important point you want to make. And then when you've made it, you know that you're done. Presenting conclusions. So, until now, we've just talked about what conclusions are. Thank you for bearing with me through that conversation. I think we're on the same page. And how are you going to stand up here and present the conclusion? What sort of verbal, nonverbal techniques are you going to use? Let's start with, let's come back to this. Let's start with verbal. How are you going to do something so complicated as verbally say you have a conclusion. What words might you use? You might say the conclusion is simple. What we can tell from this, what we take away. Now, data shows an upward trend of 4%, but the interpretation is nonverbal. What sort of things are you going to use to show your audience that you're getting to the important conclusion? Nonverbal. What might you do? Pause. You're talking fast and all of a sudden you stop. Your audience is going to look up, oh, she's getting to the important point. Or she just said something important before that. And she's pausing to let me absorb that. So, oh yeah, that's the conclusion. Decreased rate of speech, slow down. If you're just spitting out data, the premises, you might go a little faster. You get to the important part, you might slow down. Casual tone. You might be talking in more of a formal tone like Marco Rubio talks when you're going through the support and the evidence. But when you're getting to the bottom line, you might talk in a more casual tone like Donald Trump. All right. Upward trend of 4%, yada, yada, yada. Which means our country is going to hell. Relaxed posture, shift in movement. You might be standing up here behind the lectern, going over the warm-up data. And then you might walk towards your audience, shift in movement. The important thing is we need to build a wall. Visual aid, something in your presentation, your PowerPoint that says this is the conclusion. Okay. Now what I skipped over earlier, because I forgot I had that slide in, is this question. Must your conclusions be stated? Hopefully you didn't see the answer. Do you need to see do you need to state your conclusion, or can you just present the data and say the conclusion is obvious? Everyone should probably get it. No? Why not?
Because we cannot make sure that the audience we present can get what you expect.
Yeah, you may be expecting one thing. It may be obvious to you because you're the expert. The data may speak to you because of your experience, but it doesn't speak to your audience the same way. You have to actually say it. Your audience wants you to say it. Don't let it speak for yourself. Don't assume it's obvious. Consider this technique I like called assuming agreement. If you think it's so painfully obvious and you think your audience is going to feel like they're being talked down to if you say it, you could say something like this. Say, as you can see. As I'm sure you understand by looking at the data. As with your experience, I'm sure you know this company is going bankrupt. It's one of those techniques. All right. Premises. All right, presenting the premises. Now, I just went over presenting conclusions. Now let's look at some verbal, non-verbal ways you might present the premises. Verbally, you might say, what have I got? Sourced facts, informed opinions, assumed agreement. All right, so sourced facts, you might say, all right, Bloomberg says the data is going up by 4%. Job, whatever, Yahoo Finance says that we're looking at this with the unemployment figures. You could include some of your opinions as you're interpreting that data. The reason I put this note up is that you don't always have to wait until you get to the important conclusion to put in a little bit of your own interpretation. Similarly, I also have this concept of assumed agreement with premises. Sometimes it's very important that you clarify the premise on which you're basing your conclusion. It's so important. But you might be afraid that your audience is going to feel like you're talking down to them. So you can use the same assumed agreement technique. If you need to set something up, you need to make something up. As you know, as you can see, non-verbally. Okay, so non-verbally, you're presenting a premise. For the non-verbal presenting a conclusion, I mentioned slow down. So I'm not going to tell you to speed up for presenting a premise. If anything, I'm going to tell you to slow down for both of them, but slow down for more for a conclusion. One thing I do want to mention that you can use for nonverbal technique with presenting the premises that support your conclusion is what I call a presentation motif. Presentation motif is a recurring verbal or physical action used to illustrate a parallel relationship between sections of a presentation. So say you have 5 points that are going to prove your conclusion. Point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, and point 5. And as you go through each of those points, you might hold your hand up and say, point 1 is yada, yada, yada. It's point 2, point 2. So every time you do this hand up, point 1, point 2, your audience knows you're moving on to the next point that supports your presentation. This is not brain science. This is not something that you need to make complicated. This is a simple tool that's going to help your audience follow your presentation. All right. How are we doing? Do we need a break? Break? Keep going? Guess we'll take a break at some point. Keep going a few more minutes and then we'll break. All right. So let's talk about organization. And I want to talk about 3 parts to your presentation that you're going to give next week. You're going to be standing up here giving a 2-minute presentation. It's still going to have a beginning when you start introducing the concept. It's going to have a middle when you get into the meat of your concept. And it's going to have something that's obviously concluded. Well, obviously the end. I shouldn't use the word conclude, but obviously the end. I want to draw your attention to this concept of attention and how your audience is paying attention and what they're retaining at the beginning, middle, and end of a presentation. So this graph, attention and retention curve, on the vertical axis we have the attention that your audience is giving you. We've got 0%, your audience is not listening to you whatsoever. 100%, your audience is really focused on you. On the horizontal axis, we have time. We have the beginning of your presentation, middle of your presentation, end of your presentation. So this is not an exact scientist, but tell me what's going on with that graph. What's the point the author of this graph is trying to make? Natalie?
Perhaps it's saying, when you first get up there and start engaging the audience, they're ready to hear what you have to say, then their attention kind of dips. Probably when they hear those words, in conclusion, they'll start to listen again.
Yes, yes. So your audience's attention is highest at the beginning and the end, dips a little bit in the middle. So where might we want to work in our important conclusions? Do we want to work in our important conclusions right here? Not so much. We want to get them out at the beginning, maybe come back to them at the end. And we want to think about ways we can use the concept on this curve to our advantage. Beginning, high attention. What we might want to do is throw out the conclusion. The thing you're going to get out of this presentation is why we should not invest. I'm going to explain the facts and the premise that support that. Establish value, build some context. You have your audience's attention. When we get to the middle, we have to face that dreaded point in the curve where our audience's attention might be low. There's some things we can do to make it a little bit higher. Let me ask you this question. When we get into explaining the meat of our conclusion, do we want to throw out our conclusion first, or do we want to save our conclusion to the end, throw it out last? Last? One vote for last?
What you just mentioned, conclusion at the beginning.
Right, it did. So this is a little nuance in the way I'm presenting it. You definitely, I would recommend, let me tell you the conclusion where I'm going in this speech at the beginning. But there's got to be a point where you get into the meat of your presentation and you can say, all right, now we're going to go through the data, we're going to go through this. As you get into a more in-depth conversation, I still think you're going to face the dilemma. Do you start from where you initially started with the research and the evidence and building up to the punchline of the conclusion? Or do you start with a more thorough explanation of your conclusion and then explain the premises supporting it? Does that make sense? All right, so, yes.
I was taught that sometimes it's good to reinforce your conclusion midway through. But so far I have shown you this.
Mm-hmm.
And for the rest of my talk, we're going to be focusing on this to show you how I reached this conclusion.
Yes, okay. So that's a conclusion first.
Right.
Technique. So this is the conclusion, and I'm going to show you how I reached the conclusion. Do you favor that technique, conclusion first? Alright,
Work for me personally.
Okay, so we've got one conclusion first, we've got one conclusion last. Yes.
I'll do a conclusion last.
Okay.
I think if you do conclusion first, sometimes you could alienate some of the audience that don't agree with the conclusion if they're not interested in being open-minded. And also, for people who do agree with you, even presenting the facts, you just kind of bring some confirmation bias where they already agree, so they're not really going to be able to analyze the data neutrally.
That's a good point. So the first thing you mentioned was that your audience might not be receptive to your conclusion. So if I know you're going to disagree with my conclusion, and then I hit you with it right off the bat, I might lose you right then and there. I might lose my chance to explain. So if you're facing a hostile audience, I would recommend a conclusion last. And also if you want to, if you're doing some sort of research, if you're trying to look for your audience's interpretation, the second point you brought up was interesting as well. Did everyone hear his second point? If you want to see what your audience thinks based on the premises you work with, see what their conclusion would be, that's I'd say maybe a rarer type of presentation. For the most part, you're going to be standing up. Here's the important thing I want you to understand and know. But other than that, I would favor a conclusion first technique. The reason I would favor a conclusion first is because you get the benefit of that attention curve scenario where we have the audience paying more attention at the beginning of our presentation. And when we hit our conclusion first, we emphasize it more. So the important conclusion that you need to take away is this. And I'm going to explain the premises that support that. When we do our conclusion last, we emphasize the process, or we emphasize the data. I like to use the example. And imagine you're asking your audience to put together pieces of a puzzle. And if you give them the conclusion first, then you've told them the picture that is on that puzzle as a whole. Say, we're going to be putting together a picture of a puzzle of the Statue of Liberty. Now let me tell you how each of the pieces fit together. Doing the conclusion last is similar to asking your audience to put together a puzzle without knowing the picture on it. Does that make sense? Now sometimes you might want to do that. One, if you know your audience is not going to like the picture. Two, if you want to see what your audience comes up with in terms of their picture. But for the most part, I favor conclusion first. Yes, Priya?
This is a little counterintuitive because you need to have an agenda even before you walk into a meeting. And you need to actually have the agenda sent out to your team members, or even, let's say your boss you're having a conversation with. I mean, you can't need to have a plan, which you need to communicate with them beforehand.
Yeah, and I think that plan might be the conclusion. So during this meeting, Priya is going to explain why we should expand into Seattle and not expand into Houston.
So can you give us some examples where you would actually not give the conclusion beforehand?
Sure. I can give some examples. Maybe somebody else can help me out with an example. Let's see. Suppose you're going to tell someone that their building is going to be closed and they have to move out. You might want to explain that, listen, there's some safety concerns that we need to talk about. There's some other things that are important in this decision. And the conclusion is just one example. Somebody else help me out. What's an example of why you want to give the conclusion last because you have a hostile audience?
I'll actually give a personal example. So prior to business school, I worked in this organ transplantation. So part of my job is to go out and make persuasive presentations to various groups to get them to buy into whatever we were doing or to register to be an organ donor. People have a lot of negative feelings about organ donation, and if I started off my presentation by saying, I'm here today to get you to sign up to be an organ donor, half of the time the room would be like, no thank you. So it took me giving data, letting them hear testimonials from like an organ recipient, tugging the emotional strings, and then the consent rates were like completely different. Because we've done it different ways, so we knew. We start off by saying, I'm here to sign you up to be an organ donor, 50-something% of the audience completely no. But when we did it the other way, where we didn't tell them what the intention was, and at the end asked them for, this is what we need from you, it was over 75%.
Did you, before you walk in for those presentations, did you actually tell them why you're coming over there, or
They
why
knew
you're
of our organization. Say we're from Gift of Life Donor Program, part of Donate Life America's the Organ Return Agency. They know what we do, but the outline and the purpose of the presentation wasn't necessarily clear all the time. Because I could have just went up there and just talked and gave data, but ultimately I went to talk to people to get them to sign up to be organ donors. And if I said that up front, one, people probably wouldn't show up for the presentations, and two, they probably would not be much of a captive audience because they had their predispositions about organ donation. So that was our strategy, and it worked really well when we did it the other way.
Okay, good example. So, brings us to the end of our organization. We know that our audience's attention is generally higher at the end of end of our presentation because they assume we're going to sum up with important points, or because they know they get to go relax after the presentation, so they're focused a little bit more. Excellent time to hit them with your important points. Reinforce those main things you want your audience to take away. Get that ingrained in the long-term memory. All right, so let me go over this last slide and then we'll take a quick break. So there are various presentation methods we can use as we give a speech. We can read a speech word for word. We can memorize the speech word for word. We could give a speech with an outline, or we could memorize the outline. These are presentation styles we can use. Let me ask you, we'll run through each of these four. When might we want to read a presentation word for word? When would that be appropriate?
Quotations, like if I am giving a
What type of presentation are you talking about?
let's say a science. I'm thinking about my past, like I would give out like scientific presentations.
Okay,
And
you
I'm
said
quoting somebody else's work.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I understand. What I'm talking about is when you're giving that presentation, would you write out your entire speech of everything you're going to say?
Oh, no.
No. When would it be appropriate to write out everything you're going to say and read it word for word?
I would say news report.
News reports?
On television, when
Like
you
a-
have limited, amount of time to present certain amount of data, you're given a script and you have to follow word by word, I think.
Press conference? Yes?
Yes, of course.
Absolutely. Funeral? Let's come back to funeral. Press conference, what else?
Things with legal implications or
Legal
specific language
implications.
is important.
Yes, State of the Union address. All right, that's the environment. It's beneficial where the wording is so critical. Now you lose something when you read a speech word for word, right? You lose spontaneity. Your audience knows you're just giving them a textbook. Now how about a funeral? Let's go back to that one. Now there, the words might be very important, and you might be able to invest some emotion even though you have written words. And that's an interesting example of how you could bring that emotion to something that's pre-prepared. But still, that also might be an environment where people want to hear your feelings. When they're grieving, they want to hear how you're dealing with this so that can help them relate to this. You lose the ability to connect with your audience when you read word for word. All right, now how about memorize word for word? We might really want to do that. Yes.
I think if you are an international student, you are not good at speaking English, so you have to organize every sentence in advance. I think in that scenario,
Yeah?
memorize word for word is very efficient way to present.
Yeah. How about an elevator pitch? Maybe a short, this is my career objective. You might want to think about something you can do concisely like that. All right, good. How about using an outline? So maybe if you're going to come do your presentation next week, you might have 4 or 5 points. Here's my outline, and then you talk spontaneously when you're in between those. What type of environment? What does that give us? What do we gain from that? What type of environment? Yes, Jerry.
You're spontaneity or spontaneous because should otherwise include.
Yes, 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 yes. And we can face this choice of using an outline or actually just memorizing the outline. Before you stand up to give your presentation, you can say, all right, there's 3 points I want to make. I want to talk about marketing, I want to talk about operations, and I want to talk about the finance aspect. Okay, now. Yes?
What if you have a lengthy presentation, you may want to use the outline so that you go on that?
Yeah, if you're afraid you're going to forget the outline, you may want to have a little written something there to keep you on track. So, when you all come in next week to give a 2-minute presentation on an important conclusion, which of these 4 methods you think might work the best for you? Which would be the most effective way to give that
I
presentation?
will go with use outline.
Use outline? One vote for use outline?
I said memorize outline.
Yeah, I would say these 2 are going to be the most effective for next week's presentation. Because you're just going to be talking to your MBA colleagues. They don't want to hear a written script. They want to hear your insight. They want to hear your real casual words. You can have an outline if it helps keep you on track, if your outline is very complicated. Memorize outline is one that I favor. You gain a lot when you're able to just talk without use of notes. You look like more of an authority on the issue. People are going to be more interested in listening to you. So, in terms of the presentation method for next week, let's use one of those 2. The assignment for next week, present a conclusion. Conclusion can be anything. It can be why you're an excellent candidate for the job. It can be that you should engage in passive investing and not active investing. Decide what it is, come up with 1 to 2 minutes with a few premises to support that conclusion. Use this framework that we talked about. How are you going to present that conclusion verbally when you get to it? How are you going to present that conclusion non-verbally? Using a pause, shift in movement. We'll do it in class 2. Questions on this assignment?
What's going to be the assignment?
What's that?
What are we going to conclude? Like, are you going to give us an assignment that day?
This is an oral presentation that you're going to do next week. And between now and next week, you're going to think, what could I talk for 2 minutes on? Yes, yes. In fact, let's get some topic ideas so we can start brainstorming on that right now. You want to have an idea of what they might want to give their presentation on? Yes.
I like the idea of saying passive and active investment.
Yes, all right. The conclusion is we should engage in passive investing. Here's why. 2 minutes on that. What else?
Job application, why they should hire.
Excellent. All right, you can stand up here, spend 2 minutes telling us why you're an excellent candidate for this particular job. Yes.
Well, I think I want to spend some time talking about why you should do a full-time MBA program instead of flex time.
Perfect. Full-time MBA conclusion. Full-time MBA is better than flex time. Here's why. Yes.
Why should we take the class business communication? That should be a must, right?
Yes, that's the conclusion. It should be a must. It should be a required class. Here's 3 reasons why. So, note a couple things. Every suggestion that everyone made, I said, yes, that's a great idea. So if you have a suggestion between now and next week, I'm sure I would say, yes, it's a great idea. As long as you're able to frame that conclusion with a few premises that support it and logically lead to it. Any questions? All right, so let's take, how long do you take breaks for? Go, 15 minutes? Depends.
Usually 10 to 15 minutes.
10 to 15 minutes. Okay, so let's come back at 2:45, and then the second half of class will go a little bit faster. We'll finish up. So I'll see you at 2:45.
exactly similar, the two different things. Nothing that like widely affects the teaching.
Right, absolutely. Perfect. I mean, it will be a unique presentation for sure.
Because
We're in a different position, different person, yeah.
so with performance year, maybe you talk about maybe a job or something, maybe you talk about why you're qualifying, I guess.
So at the beginning, you will. One of the things that I got is at the beginning, you might want to say, what's the topic? At the end, what I'm going to tell you. So, I'm going to tell you why I'm actually here in this position. That's the conclusion right after that. Then you get into the middle. So, I'm an actual accountant, kind of in this position for 3 reasons. Let me explain those 3 reasons. As opposed to, let me tell you about 3 stories about myself, and then you get to me what that means.
Basically, you're saying like the beginning, you just say introduction, you say go. Like conclusion, you're like, I'm the best person.
There's definitely a strong argument for doing that. We talked about some other reasons you don't necessarily have to. Hostile audience or possibly other reasons.
I can do that, like, you know, with that, it was the introduction, like, it wasn't in the introduction, it was actually after the introduction. It's not even,
Yeah, and I realize that it's not even past that. It was, but it was, but it was not even. But, these are just that retention around. It's kind of so, it's not scientific, it's just something to keep in mind.
But I just know that's.
Okay, so let's go ahead and finish up our class. This next section should go a little bit faster, but thank you for hanging with me. I know there's a lot of just content, a lot of basics, mechanics that I need to get through in this first class. Next class, I'll have you up with presentations, have you a little bit more engaged. Let's move on then to the next part, which is how are we going to write conclusions. We'll do this, we'll do a number of writing assignments in class, and take away with what I teach is that we want to have a clear point when we write. And in writing, we tend to call something not a conclusion, but a thesis. We could call it a conclusion. We could use it the same way, but I use the term thesis just so we don't get confused with anything you learned in high school writing. So we have a thesis that we'll write about when we write. Short statement that summarizes the main point of our essay, and everything in the essay will be centered around that. Now, it gets a little easier when we write to ramble because there's not an audience sitting in front of us that's giving us weird looks when we get off topic. So let's remind ourselves, we've got a topic that we might be writing on, and we've got a thesis, which is something we want to say on that topic. And we want to limit what is in our writing to just what we want to say on that topic. Topic might be the subject, issue, or problem that we're addressing in this written memo. Thesis is the finding, the proposal, the conclusion, point, thing we want to take away, or our opinion on it. I'm going to introduce this thesis and subheading framework. This, I think, is a valuable way to approach writing assignments. So I've got, I think, 3 or 4 assignments that are all based on this framework. And it has some valuable business components that you will use in other types of writing. I've condensed them into this one, and it's based primarily on a textbook written by the former head of the Business Communications Department, Carter Daniel, who taught here years and years ago. I didn't make you buy his textbook because the valuable part, or I shouldn't say valuable part, gosh, just the only valuable part of the former head of the Business Communications Department. Now, everything in the book was valuable, but the part that I focus on for this class is this thesis subheading framework. And I'll just fire it at you and we'll discuss and make sure you don't have any questions. Thesis subheading framework is going to consist of a title. It's going to consist of a thesis, obviously, a thesis paragraph, which we'll discuss, subheadings, subheading paragraphs, and topic sentences within each of those subheading paragraphs. Let me show you an example, and then we'll go through these 6 one by one. Suppose you're going to write me a memo that's going to recommend organizational changes for your company. You might have a clear and engaging title that tells me that's what your business essay is about. You might have a paragraph at the beginning which explains a little context and contains a thesis at some point in it. You might also have some subheadings which are going to tell me the outline that are going to support your main point in this paper. With bolded subheadings. Each of these subheadings might have a paragraph that explains that concept a little bit more. And each of those paragraphs within it will have a topic sentence that guides us through the points in that paragraph. So let me...
Where's the topic sentence?
Topic sentences are usually the first sentence in each paragraph. You can make it tricky if you want for more creative writing, but for business writing, I recommend you always stick to that. So let me read you a couple pieces of that, just so we get the flavor of this. So as an industry, pharmaceutical research is constantly evolving and pioneering, yada yada. In order to remain competitive in this environment, our company must structure to support a flexible workforce. To support a flexible workforce, I recommend that we flatten our organizational structure, consolidate departments, and deploy an electronic notebook. So what I'll point out to you here is we've got what we're going to call the thesis paragraph, and we've got something at the end which sounds an awful lot like a thesis. And then we've got subheadings that are going to support this thesis. Within each of these subheadings, as Levy mentioned, we're going to have a topic sentence that is going to guide us through those paragraphs. And then we are going to fill out the rest of the paragraph to explain that in more detail. All right, I realize this seems simple, can get complicated, and as I'm talking it through now, I'm realizing it's been a while since I've explained this because I'm so used to going over it in class. My students get tired of hearing about this thesis subheading format. So I'm just having to take a breath and realize that I'm just starting at the beginning with this thesis subheading format. So we're going to go through it slowly and make sure no one has any questions on it. Unless anyone has any questions right now. Okay. So how do I want to do this? I want to go through one by one. So, thesis subheading format, you're going to have a clear title. That title might be something that's going to engage and inform the audience, might provide context, may provide the actual thesis. So title is important. The first thing your audience sees, first thing your professor sees when he's grading the assignment, should give some impression, should give some idea of what the essay is going to be about. Hopefully provide some context and some idea, perhaps, of the thesis. Brings us to the next one. This thesis paragraph. You may have heard of this called an introduction, maybe an executive summary. Carter Daniel in his book calls it a thesis paragraph, so we're just going to call it that. This is an initial paragraph that's going to provide some context to our topic. And it is going to contain a one-sentence thesis statement, for sure. In this introductory paragraph, we want a clear thesis. And everything in your essay is going to center around that thesis. Now, this next point. We want this thesis to indicate subheading content and predicted order. What do I mean by that? Or what did Carter Daniel mean by that? So you're going to read a thesis paragraph. And I should say actually within the thesis. When you read that thesis, you're going to know what the subheadings are going to be and in what order they're going to be. That's the answer I was looking for. So, just by reading the one sentence, you're going to say, oh, this is the point the writer is trying to make. I bet the writer is going to have 3 subheadings that are going to contain those 3 very things he just mentioned in the thesis. And this thesis paragraph is going to provide some context for us. So let's look at our example that I just read to you quickly. I'll read it a little bit slower now. So, as an industry, pharmaceutical research is constantly evolving and pioneering new discoveries that help patients overcome disease in order to remain competitive in this environment. Our company structure must be able to support a flexible workforce. To support a flexible workforce, I recommend that we flatten our organizational structure, consolidate departments, and deploy an electronic notebook. Does anyone see a thesis within that thesis paragraph?
I recommend that we flatten out our organizational structure, blah, 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 blah.
Yes. To support flexible work, this sentence here, I like as our thesis. Y'all like that as the thesis? Now, tell me, just based on reading that one sentence, what do you think the subheadings are? In what order will they be in? You know, what are the subheadings?
Organizational structure, consolidated departments, and the last one, deployed electronic.
Yes. We've got 3 subheadings. All right, we know what the writer is trying to say, clearly with the thesis. We know what points are likely to be expanded upon. And when we get to the subheadings, we want these to be predictable from the thesis. We don't want to be surprised. We don't want to read the thesis and have us think the essay is going to be about one thing, and then we see the subheadings and have it be about something completely different. Predictable. Parallel structure. What do I mean by putting subheadings in parallel structure?
Start doing something, the first time, and the second step, that would be also acting or
Yes. Yes, I like where you're going with that. A way to sum it up is each of the subheading should be the same part of speech. And you use the term doing something. So if they're a verb, like to flatten, to organize, to deploy, those are all verbs, and you want them all to be in parallel structure. If they are nouns, say you're going to, I'm going to tell you about 3 things that I did on my vacation. Rafting, hiking, and kayaking. Your subheadings would be 3 nouns. It's going to be easier on your audience, easier on your reader to absorb the information if they're in parallel structure. We'll talk a little bit more about parallel structure with some examples in a moment. Concise. We want concise subheadings. We don't want 1 sentence long subheadings. Defeats the purpose. Subheadings are there to guide our audience, to guide our reader, help our reader quickly understand what this essay is about. All right, so we read through this thesis paragraph, and we like, for subheadings, flatten organizational structure, consolidate departments, and deploy an electronic notebook. So see, we've got these 3 things, which were specifically mentioned in our thesis, in that order. And we've got each of the 3 start with a verb, followed by a noun. Flatten, consolidate, deploy, organizational structure, departments, electronic notebook. Now there's a little bit of quasi-violation of parallel structure. Do you see this noun is a 2-word noun, organizational structure? This word is a 1-word noun. It'd be ideal if they could all be the same, but this is close enough. So subheadings. In parallel structure, concise, and predictable based on the thesis. Let's talk about parallel structure, make sure we're clear on what that is. I've got some examples, let me throw them out. We talked about this idea of an objective earlier and how it helps us. So suppose I'm going to give you a presentation and I'm going to tell you an objective forces us to try, monitor, and make adjustments. Those 3 in parallel structure? Not quite. Even I don't know if you see. Did you see me do a little double take because I forgot what I put up there?
To adjust.
Yeah. Try, monitor, adjust. It has such a nice ring to it. Makes it easier on your audience. They know where you're going, and they can absorb it just a second faster. So what if we say instead, try, monitor, and adjusting is necessary for the presenter? How about that? No, that's even worse. Try, monitor, adjust. Don't make your audience work harder than they have to. Don't make your professor work harder than he has to. A paper that is well structured, you can grade in 2 minutes because I can see your thesis, I can see your subheadings, quickly scan your topic sentences, barely read the paragraphs. The only thing that really takes me any time is to write 10 out of 10, good job, exclamation point, on to the next one. Now, if I'm grading a paper that is not in a clear structure like this, it takes me a really long time. Sometimes maybe it takes me 30, 40 minutes just to figure out, well, what's your thesis, what are you trying to say, and how can I help you say it better? But if you can use these techniques to be in clear, succinct order, it's going to help your audience. Another example of parallel structure. Examine facts, question witnesses, present recommendations. Is that in parallel structure?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Easy on the brain. Last example. Italy, France, Brooklyn.
No.
Not quite. Right?
It's not a country.
You're like, wait, let's go to, I'm confused here. Why are you making me think so hard? You're this fancy MBA I hired from RBS. We're paying you a crazy salary, and all of a sudden you're making me think about what's going on in your paper? Now, they are all nouns, and they all are places, so it's a little bit of a gray area, but it makes you think too much. Okay, that's parallel structure, in particular how we want to use parallel structure with our subheadings. Now on to topic sentences. I just skipped over, I just briefly mentioned it earlier, but let's talk about it a little bit more. What is a topic sentence? Feel free to read. Maybe tell me what you remember from English class in high school.
You want something to say?
Yes.
Well, it could be a sentence that would be describing the topic that you present in the paragraph.
Yes. So it's the main topic, it's the main thing that you're going to be writing about in your paragraph. It's like a mini thesis for your paragraph. Typically, you'll have that topic sentence at the beginning of the paragraph. And that's the way I'll ask you to do it for everything in this class. Mini thesis, usually first sentence. All right. Subheading example with the topic sentence. So we know what our thesis is. We've got these 4 things, recommendations for the company. We've got subheadings in good, predictable order. Now we're getting into the meat of it. We're going to read this paragraph on flattening organizational structure. We look at the first sentence and we say, first, we must flatten our organizational structure in order to allow our scientists to make decisions faster. I'll build the suspense. That is the topic sentence. Everything underneath it explains that in more detail. So you can see the topic sentence is just another clue for our reader. So by the time we even get to this topic sentence point, we've given our reader so much information about what we're trying to say in this essay. We've shown them a good title that puts it in a frame of reference for us. We've given them a concise thesis paragraph with a clear thesis. And when they read that thesis, they knew what our 3 subheadings were going to be. And then boom, they saw each of our 3 subheadings. And now, to hammer it in one more time, we're even giving them a topic sentence so they know what to expect in this paragraph.